Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode of Autism Stories, Charlotte Bachelor joins us to discuss the impact of storytelling and how Comic-Con has been a healing experience for her. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Charlotte, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here.
I'd like to start out by learning about your story in terms, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
So I started suspecting I was autistic in 2020 and had done some research. At the time, I had already been diagnosed with bipolar 2. And I had some chronic health issues. So most of the interactions I had with like the healthcare system surrounded managing my bipolar 2 and managing my chronic health issue. In the spring of 2022, I had really bad autistic burnout. I think I was in my junior year of college. And there was just something that I couldn't attribute to my bipolar disorder. And I started doing research and I was like, well, maybe I should get evaluated for autism. So at the time, I got a new psychiatrist because the psychiatrist I had wasn't listening to me. And I started researching places in Michigan that would test adults for ASD and that also accepted insurance because autism evaluations can be quite pricey. I think I paid like $350 for mine, which is on the low end. And while I was kind of doing this research and digging and searching for things, I had a professor that shared her experience of being late diagnosed. And she actually referred me to this place called the Sunfield Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I had my full neuropsych eval, and it was a great experience. And I think like in December of that year, because I started looking in May, got in November. By December, I had finally gotten my autism diagnosis.
I do love hearing about a neuropsych eval being a great experience because so often that isn't the case. What made it so for you?
Well, having someone refer you there that you trust like a professor, and obviously this is someone who has like 20 years on me who had a positive experience, and that just doesn't focus on kids. I would say that neuropsych eval is kind of like going to the doctor and taking like a mental or a cognitive SAT. So the testing itself isn't fun or enjoyable. It's a little taxing and I think I took 8 hours of testing and then had some follow-up conversations with the doctor. The practitioner who did it was very understanding, very professional. She didn't talk down to me. She explained things very clearly to my parents. At the end, when we discussed her findings, the explanation document I got was very thorough. They suggested, should I keep therapy? Should I find another therapist? Options for therapy at their center. So they really set me up for success in terms of what next, not just, hey, you have a diagnosis, but these are other things you may be interested in, other support groups locally, other forms of, I was in CBT therapy, like I should continue doing CBT therapy and really how to work with my other healthcare professionals to do that. So, and one of the great things I said it was a great experience was I wasn't supposed to be evaluated until February of 2023, but they had cancellations. So I went from being evaluated from waiting from May to February, from May to November, which is kind of unheard of because we hear a lot of like, yeah, there's like a year-long wait or a too-long wait, and especially with the backlog from COVID. So I was blessed to have an experience that was highly rated by not only my professor, but my psychiatrist said that she had taken her son there. So kind of being able to go somewhere that's highly recommended by community members and people I trust made it as great of an experience as you can having a neuropsych eval. Like I said, It's not fun. It's kind of very arduous and tedious and seems repetitive and can be kind of frustrating. But when I read the results, it made sense like why I had to do the things I did without making me feel uncomfortable or without talking down to me or, without understanding kind of the nuances and intersectionality of what autism looks like in an adult Black woman versus, a young child. So I think the evaluator also took those things into perspective and also took into things family history, parent interviews with me. So I think she really got a full picture and was very thorough.
I learned about you on social media, and at the top of your LinkedIn profile, you discuss being a dynamic storyteller. And I feel like for myself, the way I learn best is definitely through storytelling. So I was curious, what do you think are some important things to consider when we as autistic people tell the stories about our lived experiences?
Yeah, so I think we see this conversation over happen a lot play out in the autism sphere on social media. And I think the first thing people need to remember is that their experiences aren't one size fits all. The autistic community is incredibly diverse. So just because someone's experience is different than yours doesn't make it good, bad, or less than. I think even outside of the context of autism advocacy and autism awareness, there is this great TED talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of the Single Story. And the main point of her speech is that single narratives lead us to make assumptions and not understand the full breadth of a situation or how dynamic people in their stories are. So people can really only be an expert on their experience with autism. I am someone diagnosed with level 1 ASD. I can't speak to having level 2 or level 3 or be non-speaking or needing a full-time caregiver. So when I write and speak about experiences with autism, I focus on my experiences and what people can learn from them, whether that's other people who have whose autism displays same way as mine, whether that's parents, whether that's people wanting to learn more about autism. And it's okay if not everyone finds my experiences relatable. I'm not here to make everyone happy. My experience is my experience. So there isn't a singular autistic experience. And I think we need to take a less black and white approach when understanding someone's lived experience and why people may not speak on all topics or may defer to other people with lived experiences. So, for example, if someone came to me to talk about special education or ABA therapy, I don't have those experiences. So I would not speak on those experiences. I would say, hey, this is an account you can learn from, or this is a great article, or this is a great resource. So it's also important to uplift stories that differ from our own because we can only talk so much about our experience. Not saying we don't have great insight in our experience, but understanding our worldview is only as limited as our experiences. So I think that's important because people see things differently, people experience things differently. That's why it's called the autism spectrum, not the autism one lane highway. So I think that's something, especially people who are early, are getting or who are early in their advocacy work, or just getting started to understand those lived experiences and kind of where they fit in with that. There's room for everyone's story. People just need to recognize that they're not always going to be the center of attention, or their experience won't always be the gold standard autistic experience. So learning to hold space for your own and also making room for other people's experiences, I think is super important, and knowing when not to speak about certain things. Like if you don't have that experience, don't speak on it. Uplift someone else's voice.
Now, thinking about stories that I think is critical to learn about is that I read that you minored in African American studies. Now, I myself took a couple of African American studies classes in college and fell in love with the works of those folks like Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, to name a few. I'm wondering, were there any authors, poets, or important African Americans you learned about that most resonated with your life experiences?
To kind of start this off, I really have to give my flowers to the dynamic work of the Department of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University, where I studied. So my education was a little different, where it was rooted in Black feminism and was taught by all Black women professors, the entire department. So having that space was very transformative to me. Being at a predominantly white institution, Michigan State University, where only about 6% of the student population is Black there. So dealing with a lot of microaggressions and a lot of tension at the time when I became a student, when I started studying the minor, was really great. So I have to give credit to the work of Dr. LeConte Dill, Dr. Shamar Kwachi, Dr. Yvonne Morris, and Dr. Trimiko Melisson. And those are all professors I studied under, whether that was doing creative work, whether that was for writing capstone, Black feminisms, Black gender studies. They all really had a profound impact on me as a writer and a Black woman in my early 20s. And I think kind of taught me how to be an advocate and taught me to hone my gifts and really made space for discussions about disability justice and things that aren't oftentimes fully covered in a curriculum, but they made space for me to do that. Outside of my amazing professors, I became really attached to the work of Bell Hooks because she so effortlessly and eloquently covered so many relevant topics. And her book, my favorite book by her, is all about love. Speaking about autism and autistic authors, I really like the work of Tiffany Hammond. She has a Substack and shares her story. You probably know her, Fidgets and Fries, on Instagram. And she wrote the children's book, A Day Without Words, and shares kind of her powerful narrative essays online about being an autistic parent, raising an autistic child. And I think her perspective is great because we hear from parents, but I know sometimes there's that like autism parent stereotype, autism mom, autism dad stereotype. And I think she does a really good job of holding space for autistic individuals, but holding space for her child and her experience as a parent. And I don't often see, well, she's a writer, but you don't often see that done so gracefully and so effortlessly. So I really like her work as well.
Not too long ago on social media, you shared about going to Comic Con to heal your inner child. You know, I think as autistic people, we're often on a healing journey. So I'm curious, how did Comic Con help with you in that healing process?
For me, it took me back to a simpler time of being a kid and not and having what felt like endless time to explore my special interest, to go down these rabbit holes, to spend all night reading manga or spend the entire summer break watching anime or being in fan forums. You know, as an adult, I have bills to pay and I have a full-time job and I'm a freelancer. So I just can't spend all of my time and resources on my special interests unfortunately. But going to Comic Con made me realize I didn't need to make more time for that in my day to day life. The first convention I went to was in 2013. So I've been going to conventions on and off for about 11 years. And I hadn't been to one like pre pandemic. So I think it made me realize that I need to make more time in my day to day life for joy, and that there's also room for joy in the advocacy work that we all do. It's so easy to get caught up with educating yourself and networking and feeling like you're doing enough advocacy work online or offline. If you're like me, you're a writer looking for opportunities to get your work out there or looking for opportunities to speak. So just taking the time, taking a weekend, taking a couple weeks a day just to spend time in like what I've loved doing and what I've been interested in since I was like 5 years old really grounded me and kind of showed me that there's room for, you know, rest and enjoyment in this work that we do.
And then lastly, Charlotte, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
So if you're interested in some of my work, you can find me on LinkedIn under my first and last name, Charlotte Bachelor. I am a bit more active on Instagram where I do more of my speaking and creating content. So my Instagram account is Charlotte Says with two S's on the end.
Well, Charlotte, it was lovely to get to meet you today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will be following you on social media.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Charlotte for the conversation. To learn more about Charlotte, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode. If you've attended a Comic-Con, and if so, what was your experience? Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self directed, purpose driven lives through our customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.